Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, US President Donald Trump's tariffs on dozens of countries take effect, including massive 104% duties on Chinese goods. Beijing says it has filed a new complaint with the World Trade Organization. Elon Musk hits out at one of President Trump's top economic advisors, calling Peter Navarro a moron. Well, the White House dismisses this, saying boys will be boys. Following the capture of two Chinese citizens fighting with Russian forces on Ukrainian soil, Beijing rejects claims that there's a significant number of Chinese troops on the ground there. And Britain's Prince Harry is back in a London courtroom where he's appealing against a UK government decision to cut back his taxpayer-funded police protection during his visits to the United Kingdom. Hello and welcome. The trade war between China and the United States seems to have escalated further, with tariffs now soaring. While China has imposed an 84% tariff on all US imports, following on from President Trump's 104% duty. Well, Beijing is refusing to back down, and now this new wave of US levies on the world's #2 economy takes effect today. Meanwhile, Jameson Greer also defended the Trump administration's decision to apply a 10% tariff on Australia, despite a free trade agreement, citing the country's ban on the imports of US beef and pork.
We're addressing the $1.2 trillion deficit, the largest in human history that President Biden left us with. We should be running up the score in Australia.
Ambassador Greer, answer the question on Australia. We have a trade surplus with Australia. We have a free trade agreement. Why? They are an incredibly important national security partner. Why were they whacked with a tariff?
Senator, despite the agreement, they ban our beef, they ban our pork. They're getting ready to impose measures on our digital companies.
With your Greek letter formula, the fact that we have a trade surplus.
We have a global tariff on everywhere. We're trying to address the $1.2 trillion deficit that Biden left us with.
I think that answer, sir, you're a much smarter person than that answer.
Meanwhile, Senator Ben Ray Lujan also challenged US Trade Representative Jameson Greer, asking him to confirm that the tariffs were indeed the cause of the worst stock market drop in years.
Have we seen one of the worst drops in the stock market in over 35 years?
We've certainly seen volatility.
Have we seen one of the worst drops in the stock market in over 35 years?
I think, and Senator Warner talked about
We'll move
this.
on. If you don't want,
well, I know everyone's concerned about Wall Street, and I'm just concerned about Main Street and getting these jobs.
Well, we can get more now, and we can cross to Michigan and speak to Clark Judge. Clark, great to have you with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. You served as a speechwriter and special assistant to both President Ronald Reagan and Vice President at the time, George Bush. Let me just start by asking you, how do you think those two presidents would think of President Trump's tariff policy? What do you think they'd make of it?
Well, you'd have to look into two factors. One is that President Reagan was a professional negotiator before he was president. He was head of a union, Screen Actors Act union, and he understood very well the dynamics of negotiation, just as Mr. Trump does. And Mr. Bush was also a negotiator in the in his business life, not as intensively as President Trump or President Reagan, but still very much savvy in that. This is what we're seeing here is a negotiating is not a backing off from globalization. What we're seeing here is a course correction in globalization, that the United States has entered into a number of trade deals and some of those deals being administered somewhat differently than was anticipated in negotiations, and now finding itself not just in this area, but areas in a considerable need of revamping policy. The other areas being primarily financial as well, but also security. So I would say that Mr. Bush might not like the Mr. Trump's style, but he would understand the dynamic. Same with Mr. Reagan. I think he'd recognize very quickly all the points of a negotiation, a strong opening, then a call for getting together, then movement towards an area that was an outcome that was fixed our problems, but was also amenable to all sides.
Okay, so when you say you don't think Mr. Bush would like the style of Mr. Trump, I mean, what in particular are we talking here? The language?
Well, both Mr. Bush and Mr. Reagan were of a gentler, gentler style in their diplomacy than Mr. Trump is. But remember, a lot of Mr. Trump's, in fact, all of the harsh words of his style are done in public forum to make a public point. He is understood, as I understand it from people who've worked with him and have negotiated with him. When he gets into negotiations, it's a very different way and much more traditional.
Do you think we're seeing any signs that this approach to get people to the negotiating table, to bring about a sort of a reset in how the United States trades with the rest of the world, do you think we're seeing any signs that this approach is bearing fruit?
Well, yes, and so do the markets. You've seen this morning, at least in the United States, you've seen that the markets have been rising sharply. And this is in response to the Japanese and a number of others reaching out to enter negotiations. That's a pretty clear sign that the markets understand what is going on here, and that so long as others respond in a way that reflects that they too understand that there are imbalances in the trade agreements that have made a big difference in the United States. You mentioned that I'm in Michigan. Michigan is a center of the auto industry in the United States. In the community I live in, several years ago, in one day, all of the auto parts companies, and they were substantial in this community, announced that they were moving to Mexico, and a few weeks later they had. That's the kind of shock that has gone through a number of American communities, particularly in the Midwest, and it's it's a product of flaws in the way various trade deals were negotiated. This is not against trade, it's against it's a correction in the mistakes in particular trade deals.
But I mean, in terms of how President Trump and his administration has addressed and spoken about certain long-standing allies, trade partners, I mean, how do you think President Reagan and the late President Bush as well would think? What do you think they would think of how President Trump is treating trade partners and allies?
Well, I would say that they would. I can't speak for them, obviously, but I would say they would recognize that we're in a very different situation now. The world is, the United States is, than was the case in the period they were in office. And remember, what's going on in your particular period if you're a president, has everything to do with how you approach things. We're in a period when we've been through a number of years of 4 years, really, just before us, of tremendous profligacy in the budget. The budget is our finances as a country are very weak by historical standards. At the time that the end of the Second World War, we were half the world's population. We're about a third now, but also at that time, we were we were the most financially capable entity, our government was, in the history of the world. Now it's not even going by bond ratings, not even the most financially capable entity in the United States government I'm talking about. So these are very different times than when those two men were in. In fact, very different times than we were in any time from, say, the 1940s to just the last half decade or so.
I mean, there's going to be, according to many economists, some pain, possibly short term, who knows, could last longer for American consumers who might see price rises. There may be supply chain issues, meaning that they can't get everything they want to get. There could be bottlenecks. Do you think the Trump administration has done a good job of communicating the rationale and the logic behind these tariffs to the American public?
I think they're communicating it pretty effectively. The one thing you cannot say about President Trump is that he's quiet and reserved. That's not his style. He's doing multiple meetings with the media every day. He's on the internet himself. He's giving interviews to television hosts. Last night he gave an hour-and-a-half speech to the National Republican Congressional Committee annual dinner, in which he talked a lot about the need for Congress, the Republicans in Congress, to speak, to work with him, and that there was a clear plan and a clear goal that everyone had signed off on, and it was time to line up. He is communicating almost nonstop. So I don't think you can. I think he's been in that way very effective.
And in terms of
this kind of situation, let me just say, with this kind of situation will lead to jitters in the financial markets, as we have seen in the early stages. Later stages, as we're also seeing today, later stages coming fast at this point, taking a different view. So we have to see how this works out, but it has to do with coming to an understanding that there needs to be a course correction in these areas.
Okay, any cracks showing in the ranks of the party or in the ranks of the inner sanctum of the Trump administration that you're able to see?
No, in the ranks of the party, the cracks have more to do with the tax bill that's also going through, things like that. These cracks, the budget bill, I should say. The taxes we're pretty much united on, the Republicans are. The budget, there are those who want to cut deep and cut fast. You would think, given all that's happened with Mr. Musk and his Doge exercise, that we're moving pretty fast right now, faster than ever, on cutting costs, but and revealing waste and fraud, which used to be a slogan and is now, Mr. Musk has demonstrated as a reality that can be addressed. You'd think that everybody in Congress would be on board with we're moving as fast as humanly possible. I say we, I mean the administration. I'm not a part of it, but some are demanding more. So that was one of the themes of Mr. Trump's speech last night, that it was time for the Republicans to unite, and we'd get as far as anybody could wish at some point, the country would, in terms of reducing spending, but the party has to hold together. That's a division in the party between those who want to go fast and those who want to go faster on some of these issues, and those who want to go faster are often hard to please.
Okay, we're about 20 days short of the all-important 100-day milestone. Possibly a little early to be giving a report card to the Trump administration at this stage, but as things stand, when you look at tariffs, when you look at the activities of the Doge, all the other things that have been done so far in the last 80 days or so, is Mr. Trump delivering on that key promise to make America great again? Is he making America richer again, do you think?
Well, in the present, it's way too early. Most economists would say that it takes 6-8 months for almost any change in policy to be reflected in prosperity of the country, the rising jobs, and that sort of thing. But yes, this is the most impressive 100 days that we've seen since Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt, you recall, his first 100 days are legendary in American history for the sharp turn and for the large amount of legislation and executive orders that were issued in that time, legislation that was passed, or at least proposed, and ultimately passed. We hadn't up until this presidency seen anything even remotely like that. We did have a fast start in the Reagan years, but not as dramatic as this or as FDR. And this is on the same level as Franklin Roosevelt's.
And just lastly, one of China's rebukes, well, one of them has been to file a complaint with the World Trade Organization about these tariffs. One of the other things we've seen come out of China is this speech that Ronald Reagan gave in 1987 about trade. I don't know if you remember that speech. Perhaps you helped write it. But why do you think the Chinese are referring to that 1987 speech all these years later?
They're playing hardball in a negotiation. It's as simple as that. These are all moves of negotiation. Can they get a little bit of a drop on? That's a sort of term out of an old Western movie. A drop on someone. That means draw your gun faster. Can you? Are they getting a drop on Mr. Trump, or can they move him a bit in his negotiation? The Chinese would be extremely unwise not to engage. But right now, that's the preliminary to engaging, I hope. If they don't, that's very unwise. But
the message from President Reagan, albeit in a very different context, and you've already touched on this, was that imposing tariffs forces the closure of businesses. That seems to be the essence of that particular speech that he gave.
Yes, and that can be true. But it's also true that Mr. Reagan imposed tariffs, most famously in the protection of Harley Davidson motorcycles, when there was a view that the terms of trade, at least the rules of trade, were unfairly balanced against them. The first speech I wrote in the Reagan administration was not for either the vice president or the president, but was for one of our senior trade people, which concluded that our purpose, and it was addressing the same issues. How can you justify calls for open trade when you're being so tough? And our response was that we were interested in reducing the barriers to trade, the barriers that all nations establish in trade. In this case, as a consequence of poor negotiation or a lack of attention, the rules have tilted strongly against the United States in many areas, autos in particular in Europe and other places. And we are, just as we were then, looking for the reduction of not just ourselves, our barriers, but of our trading partners' barriers too, some of which were not anticipated in negotiations. And as I'll just return back to the German example, there was a story recently in one of the financial papers about the taxes put on American Jeeps in Germany. And one of those taxes was a very high tax, 77%, I think, on a luxury vehicle tax. Now a BMW is a luxury vehicle. A Maserati is a luxury vehicle. A Rolls-Royce is a luxury vehicle. A Jeep is not a luxury vehicle. We've seen this kind of switching around of categories and all in lots of areas, sleight of hand that has worked strongly against a truly open market. It's been allowed to go for a long time now. Mr. Trump is addressing those kinds of issues.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. We're out of time. Clark Judge, former speechwriter to President Ronald Reagan.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Meanwhile, Elon Musk has publicly clashed with President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, calling him a moron and, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks. Well, he made those comments on his social media platform, X. Well, the feud erupted after Navarro criticized Tesla, claiming that Musk was not a car manufacturer, merely an assembler. Well, Navarro, discussing Trump's tariffs policy, also expressed the desire for more US-made auto parts to be made in the future. Well, Musk, who has voiced opposition to White House trade policies, called Navarro's claims demonstrably false. Well, this marks the most public disagreement between Musk, the world's richest man and the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and President Trump's trade team. Well, when asked about the row between the two men, the White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt shrugged it off, saying these are two individuals with different views on trade and tariffs. She added, boys will be boys.
These are obviously two individuals who have very different views on trade and on tariffs. Boys will be boys, and we will let their public sparring continue. And you guys should all be very grateful that we have the most transparent administration in history. And I think it also speaks to the president's willingness to hear from all sides, that he has people at the highest levels of this government in this White House who have very diverse opinions on very diverse issues.
Well, let's get more analysis. We can speak to Paul Glastris, former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us, sir. We just heard the White House spokeswoman there in sort of damage control mode. She seemed to sort of shrug it all off, saying boys will be boys, and showing, she said that the White House is incredibly transparent about all of this. I mean, do you think it is a serious spat between these two men?
It is a serious spat, and the White House, has been trying to clamp down on everyone in the administration and the Republican Party. The one person they can't control is the world's richest man, Elon Musk. But everyone else in the party is trying their best to get on message, even though I think the vast majority of Republican voters, office holders, and so forth think this tariff regime is madness.
Yeah, so just for the clarity, for the benefit of our viewers, Musk doesn't seem to think these tariffs are a particularly good idea, does he? He thinks there should be zero tariffs between the United States and Europe. I mean, that's a pretty major difference of opinion between him and pretty much the rest of the Trump administration, isn't it?
Well, like I said, I think if you got truth serum in 9 out of 10 Trump members of his administration or members of Congress, they would agree with, probably agree with Musk. This is being driven by the president. This is the one idea of his that has very, very little support in his party. And so, oh, by the way, the tariffs between the US and the EU are extremely low. Getting them from where they are now to zero would not be a huge lift, and would not do, frankly, a whole lot of good for either side. There are some specific tariffs on specific items, agriculture and so forth, but on balance, we don't have high tariffs between us and the EU.
So when we hear Elon Musk saying that Peter Navarro is, quote, truly a moron and, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks, how do you think that sits with President Donald Trump, who has said he's not going to stand for disloyalty? I'm assuming he doesn't like disunity either.
I'm sure he doesn't. But, he is the one who invited Elon Musk to take control of the federal bureaucracy and decimate it. And, Elon Musk is, worth, well, he's worth less than he was a week ago, but still worth more than $100 billion. And, Donald Trump has decided to attach himself to Musk, and he has to kind of live with the dissent that Musk is providing.
So on the one hand, Musk is dissenting, and he's a controversial character on certain issues, some might say. On the other hand, they've got Peter Navarro, who's come up with this. He's the architect, many say, of the tariffs policy that many seem to be opposed to. So who comes out on top in a sort of with the two men to be put into the ring of public opinion? Who's going to come out on top out of Navarro and Musk?
Well, that is going to be entirely up to Donald Trump. And we honestly don't know his own mind, and it is pretty clear he doesn't know his own mind. Because, if there's any hope for across-the-board high tariffs creating new manufacturing in the United States, they have to be consistent and over the long term for any business to want to take a gamble on spending hundreds of millions of dollars building plants in the United States. If they're going to be negotiated away tomorrow, nobody's going to invest. So, Trump has gone back and forth within the same day of saying these are permanent tariffs and saying they're up for negotiation. So it's just chaos from, all the way down.
I mean, supposing these tariffs turn out to have been a stroke of genius and all countries come cap in hand to the United States, and we understand 50 plus, possibly 70 plus countries have already done so, although we don't have a clear tally. Maybe you know more on that. But supposing they all do that, I mean, this is going to make Peter Navarro look incredibly clever, isn't it? And win him quite a lot of points and quite a lot of credibility within the administration.
Well, if that's the aim, right? Again, is the aim to negotiate new trade rules with other countries, or is the aim to have a permanent tariff? And this is how Donald Trump and Peter Navarro have mostly described it: a permanent set of high trade walls within which the United States can rebuild its manufacturing base. I suppose they could flip and say, oh, it was all really a ploy to negotiate. And I suppose if they get some major concessions and we don't have a recession or a global trade war and a global recession, the Trump administration can come out ahead. But that's a big if.
Okay, and supposing this doesn't turn out to be a stroke of genius and somehow this backfires on the United States, I mean, does Peter Navarro find himself out of a job?
Donald Trump can be incredibly loyal to people who agree with him and he thinks supports him. He can be incredibly cold-blooded if he thinks otherwise. And, will he... Yeah, who knows? I have no idea about Peter Navarro. He pardoned him once. Maybe he'll pardon him again.
I mean, what about President Trump's relationship with Elon Musk? We touched on it at the beginning, but I mean, he is, they sort of need each other, don't they, these two men? And they're together and united, they're a pretty formidable duo. But do you get the impression that there are tensions and that perhaps there are more cracks than would perhaps initially meet the eye in terms of the relationship between the two men?
I mean, I don't have any insight that, your viewers couldn't get reading the same sources that I do. But one senses that, this is a combination of both men deeply exploiting what the other can provide, and at the same time, I'm sure thinking ill of the other. It's kind of scorpions in a bottle. But, each is getting a lot out of the relationship, but, each has to accept things that gag, the gag reflex happens. So that's probably what's going on.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, clearly public buy-in is important, and keeping the public on side is key to, getting them to come on board with this idea of tariffs for all the US trade partners. I mean, do you think they've done a good job of explaining to the US public what the rationale is here?
Oh my God, no. They've done a horrible job. They keep throwing out different arguments, and they don't prepare the public for what's to come. Nowhere in the run-up to this did they warn, oh, by the way, your 401k is going to lose 10% of its value within a week. Nowhere did they say the price of most things you buy will go up, even though I campaigned on bringing them down. He certainly has talked endlessly about tariffs, and nobody should be foolish enough to think he wouldn't do it. But their messaging has been all over the map.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us at short notice. Paul Glastris, former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now, following on from reports of North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine, 2 Chinese nationals have now been captured on the front line fighting for the Russian army. That's according to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Well, he also revealed that intelligence suggests that the number of Chinese soldiers is likely to be much higher. Well, Ukraine's foreign ministry stated that the presence of Chinese troops raises questions about China's stance. He confirmed that China's envoy in Kyiv has been summoned to offer an explanation. Well, for more, we can speak now to Cormac Smith, former advisor to Ukraine's foreign minister, who joins us from the UK. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, sir. Kyiv says these 2 Chinese nationals were fighting with Russia in the Donetsk region of Ukraine. I mean, what more do we know about these people? What do you think they were doing there?
Tom, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you. We don't actually know an awful lot more. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has told us, obviously, that they have captured 2 Chinese nationals. The Ukrainian government believes there are many more fighting, and I believe they have instigated an investigation by their security services. Now, obviously, there has been no comment from Beijing as yet. 2 things I would say. One, our intelligence services, and when I say our intelligence services, certainly the British and the Americans and others have been telling us for over a year that China, along with North Korea and Iran, has been supplying lethal aid to Russia to use in Ukraine. So I don't think it would be a surprise if these nationals were there under the official auspices of the Chinese government, but we simply don't know yet. It could be a case, it has been suggested to me, that these were migrant workers from China working in the Russian Federation, and of course they would be taking advantage of the very significant bounty which has been offered to join up the military and fight, which is significantly more than the average daily wage in Russia. So the truth is, one would be very, very suspicious given China's links to Russia and the aid that we know China has already been given. But I guess until there is some sort of a statement out of Beijing, and also pending further investigations from the Ukrainian government, we simply don't know, but it's worrying.
Okay, but how significant is it, though, the idea that there should be Chinese nationals fighting on Ukrainian soil, given, in particular, China's, they say, neutral stance on the conflict?
Well, as I've already said, I don't believe China is neutral in the conflict. They have placed themselves very, very firmly on Russia's side. It is hugely concerning. Ukraine is currently struggling to get more support from Western allies. Russia has stated point blank that they will not accept Western boots on the ground in Ukraine under any circumstances. Yet we have already seen tens of thousands of North Korean soldiers openly fighting with Russia against Ukraine. We know for certain that both that North Korea is supplying ammunition on a regular basis, artillery shells in particular, and of course we know that Iran is supplying Shahed drones, which are daily being used to fire on Russian or on Ukrainian civilian targets. So this would be a very, very worrying escalation. We have what up to recently a number of us called the axis of evil, which was Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And if we are to see Chinese soldiers fighting against Ukraine, this is worrying indeed.
Yeah, I wonder how it's going to be viewed by Washington, because the Trump administration from the very beginning has been pushing for a speedy conclusion to this conflict. A lot of diplomacy by this new administration. No breakthroughs so far, but I'm just wondering whether you think this is likely to anger Washington, because perhaps they might see Russia isn't quite as sincere about peace as they might have thought or might have hoped.
Well, you know, there were signs about a week ago that I will be careful of my language, but Donald Trump said that he was peed off with Russia. He saw Russia stalling. Look, it's very, very clear that Russia has absolutely no interest in a peace deal. Donald Trump famously claimed that he would end this war within 24 hours. That was never going to happen. He then moved to 100 days. I do not believe that's going to happen. In fact, my assessment and the assessment of senior people who I speak to is a peace deal this year is very, very unlikely. It would seem that, going back to your question about how might this anger Donald Trump is obviously engaged now in a deepening trade war with China. He has put significant tariffs on China. He has warned China not to retaliate. China has retaliated only today with very, very significant tariffs. The other thing that we also need to bear in mind, it is believed that what Donald Trump wants to do by working closely with Putin, which he clearly is doing, and all the pressure he is putting on is not on Putin, it's on Ukraine. And we believe that people have referred to what they call a reverse Kissinger, that what he might be trying to do is drive a wedge between Russia and China. I've got to tell you, I don't believe that will happen, and it's strategically naive of Donald Trump to think that he can do that. But you know, there's an awful lot. Donald Trump is doing an awful lot of different things in a lot of different spaces at the moment. We wait to see if indeed he overreaches on this. But this is not very good news for Donald Trump, certainly.
I mean, from the beginning of his administration and on the campaign trail as well, we heard not just from President Trump, but also from a lot of people in his party saying it's not reasonable to expect the United States to foot the bill to the extent that it has done for this war in Ukraine. I wonder what you say to that, and I wonder what you make of the plan to try to recoup some of that money in the form of the minerals deal. Do you think that's a good deal?
No, I think it's a very bad deal. I think it's a deal that's tantamount to mafia extortion. And I can say a little bit more about that in a moment. But I think, the first thing that I would say, Donald Trump has claimed erroneously that America has given $350 billion in aid to Ukraine. That is clearly false, and all reasonable audits come to a figure of probably just under 120 billion. Now that was a grant. That was never money that was supposed to be paid back. He has also claimed that the US has given a lot more support than Europe. Europe combined has actually given more support in dollar terms than the United States has. That's just to put that on the record in terms of Donald Trump's lies. But, the mineral deal, the last sighting of the mineral deal was something that Ukraine could never sign up to. There would be a majority shareholding on the board of Americans. The Americans would have the ability to stop or override any decisions. They would take all profits up front, and they would decide at a point in the future what profits Ukraine would get out of it. There was also murmurings that they were interested in Ukraine's gas and oil and in Ukraine's energy industry. So clearly a week and a half ago, I was interviewed by other stations where I said this was a deal which the Ukrainians could never accept. Now, the people I speak to are telling me that Ukraine is due to come back possibly even this week with a counter proposal on the deal. The fear is, and certainly my fear would be, that if the Ukrainians don't sign the deal that Trump wants them to sign, he will simply withdraw both intelligence and military support, as he has already done for a period of a week, and that would be very, very costly to Ukraine. And the one other thing, Tom, if I could say to this, if we look at the noises that Trump and JD Vance are making in Greenland, and they are saying they must have Greenland for security, this is patently ridiculous. There is an agreement which goes back to 1951, which says America can have as many military bases on Greenland as they desire. And of course, Denmark, as a NATO ally, they would be pushing at an open door. Denmark would cooperate in any way. So, you know, Donald Trump clearly covets Greenland, not for defensive purposes, but again, I would suggest for the rare earth metals that lie below the Greenland ice sheet. And this, I think, if we compare what he seems to be trying to do to extort Ukraine and what the noises he's making in Greenland, it puts a very, very different complexion on what Trump actually wants. As I say, this is tantamount to mafia extortion.
Okay, and just finally, I mean, turning back to Ukraine specifically, and given your former role there as an advisor to the Ukrainian foreign minister, how do you think morale is holding up there in Kyiv amongst your friends and former colleagues at the ministry? I mean, it's presumably been quite a tough couple of months for them.
Yeah, I talk to people on a regular basis. A tough couple of months, Tom. It's been a tough well over 3 years at this stage. And, you know, Ukrainians are absolutely worn out. There isn't, and I said this to a close Ukrainian friend recently, and he said, yes, absolutely. There isn't a Ukrainian now who hasn't lost somebody close to them, or at least has a close friend who has lost somebody. And I actually spoke to a Ukrainian friend who I go to the gym with here in London. And he just said to me, yes, I've lost 4 friends in the war. So, you know, I always quote a very good friend of mine, Oleksiy Mikheyev. He's currently Ukraine's ambassador to Berlin. We worked very closely together when I worked for Pavlo Klimkin. And Oleksiy said to me, within the first few weeks of this horrible war, or the further invasion, the war obviously has been going on since 2014, he said, Cormac, it's very, very simple. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin has consistently made it clear that his objectives in Ukraine remain absolutely maximalist. That is to take over not just to take over the entire country, but to wipe any sense of Ukrainian national identity off the face of the map. He does not believe, and has said many times, he does not believe that Ukraine is a real country. You know, we have had many myths and lies and disinformation, such as NATO expansion and Ukraine being full of Nazis, as to why Russia felt they had to invade. There are 2 reasons and 2 reasons only, and I've been saying this since January 2022 to anybody who would listen. 2 reasons why Russia invaded Ukraine. One, the greatest threat to the kleptocratic regime in the Kremlin is a viable, successful, democratic and free Ukraine on its doorstep, because that would send a very strong and a very dangerous message to the Russian people. And the second reason, obviously going back to, we're talking about Mr. Trump, Ukraine is potentially, if they could get past this horrible war and get Russia's boot off their throat, a very, very wealthy country. And, you know, Russia covets not just the rare earth metals that lie under Ukraine's famous black soil, as Donald Trump clearly does, Ukraine is also one of the world's great bread baskets. So, this is, and in terms of what Russia is doing, this is a 19th century war of colonial conquest. So to answer a long answer to your question, how are Ukrainians? I think they're absolutely worn out, but they cannot afford to stop fighting. And it's interesting, there was a recent survey less than a week ago, which said that even if America pulled out, that over 82% of Ukrainians insisted that they must keep on fighting. The Ukrainian people are aware of how existential this war is for them.
Okay, well, thank you. We're out of time. Really appreciate you speaking to us. Cormac Smith, former advisor to Ukraine's foreign minister. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
In other news, the Duke of Sussex, also known as Prince Harry, has been back at the High Court in London today for his latest legal challenge regarding the level of police protection he receives. Well, the UK government recently downgraded the level of personal security he's entitled to. Well, the Prince is now challenging that decision after previously losing a case to reinstate his automatic police protection whilst in the United Kingdom. Well, let's get some more analysis on this. We can speak to Davies, who's a former head of UK Royal Protection. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Just for people who don't understand all the sort of the details of this particular case, what is it that Prince Harry wants? So what's he currently got by way of police protection when he visits the UK?
Well, a very good evening or good afternoon from North Wales to you. Essentially, at the moment, RABAC, which is a group of high-profile individuals from the Home Office, Foreign Office, Royalty Protection, the Metropolitan Police, decided some years ago now, I think we go back to when Prince Harry decided to leave being an official royal, as it were, they decided when he applied for full-time protection that he didn't warrant it anymore. And the rationale they give it is that he wasn't a working royal. If, however, he gave notice, they would look at it on each case-by-case basis. And the truth is, if you know the history of attacks on the British royal family, as I do, going back to 1760, there has only been one occasion where Metropolitan Police protection officers have had to draw their firearms. The big thing for him is that he wants it 24/7 when he and his family comes. And he claims that he would be under threat in the United Kingdom, that his family would be, and without armed police protection, he can't possibly bring his family. I have to tell you, it's palpable nonsense, in my professional opinion, having been in this game at home and worked in Dubai, the Middle East and Far East. England, Britain is still a very safe place compared to most places that he has traveled to. And for somebody who doesn't want to have publicity, boy, does he go about it the wrong way.
Okay, you've mentioned lots of points there. Let me pick up on one or two of them. I mean, Prince Harry, whether or not people like him, is the fifth in line to the British throne. That doesn't change just because he's gone to live in the United States and do fewer royal duties or no royal duties. But he remains, doesn't he, a pretty high-profile target, potentially?
Well, he's been around for a number of years now. I think he's 40 plus or nearly 40. And there has been no real physical attacks on him, to my knowledge. Neither has there been on his wife or indeed his family. He does travel extensively. When he comes to this country, he is afforded a liaison officer by my former command. In other words, if he's here, he gets a qualified protection officer to act as liaison. He also has former royalty protection officers, my officers, who actually now work for him in a private capacity. And I've worked in LA, I've worked all over America. Boy, is it so dangerous as compared to our country here still, I'm pleased to say. So as I say again, it is palpable nonsense to say that he is under threat, or his family would be if he comes here. His cousins, his aunties and others have all been downgraded because the threat allegedly doesn't warrant it. Now, I'm not in a position to look at the threat assessment now, but I can assure you, if there was a credible threat in any shape or form, either in here, and it would be passed on to the American authorities in California, and again here, if there was a credible threat. There isn't. He has previous for making up threats. In my professional opinion, he does not warrant it given the state of that intelligence. Nothing is perfect, and I might be wrong. I concur.
I mean, the paparazzi is in itself a major threat, and the death of Prince Harry's mother nearly 30 years ago is a good example of that. I mean, he would argue, and there was a case in New York quite recently where him and Meghan were pursued, they say, by the paparazzi, that they do represent a major threat. And you know, we've seen an example of that in Paris in 1997.
Well, with huge respect, I was in command when Princess Diana died in Paris. It was a drunken driver that actually caused the fatality to the princess. Yes, as a former protection officer to his mother, Ken Wolfe says the press can be a pain in the rear end, but they don't kill you. What kills you are drunken drivers. If you get into a car, as indeed he did in New York, he got into a yellow cab, not knowing what kind of driver it was, what the threat was. And again, when the whole event was looked at by the authorities, it was greatly exaggerated, I am told. I wasn't there. But again, I say again, yes, the press can be a pain. And there are, if you're with qualified people, you can prevent them and develop strategies to prevent their harassment. I agree they're a pain, but they don't mount a threat in the same way as the Provisional IRA, Al-Qaeda, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all. No, let's get real on this. This costs millions, and it has to be carefully scrutinized so that those who really warrant it get it. According to current information that I have, he doesn't warrant it in any shape or form, despite, as you say, being sixth to the throne. His cousins, the Prince Andrew doesn't get it anymore either, because of his behavior, and neither do his two girls. Princess Anne's children, who arguably was the one who was attacked by an individual with a gun who shot 4 people doing it, her children have never had it, neither does her current husband. So let's get real.
Okay, I mean, we're talking here about the King's son. He's taking action, legal action against the British Interior Ministry or the Home Office. I mean, that's probably quite embarrassing for the royal family. They don't really presumably like these kind of headlines. Prince Harry back on the front pages, 2 days of court proceedings in London. I mean, what do you think the Queen, who you worked for and for whom you provided protection, what do you think she'd make of all of this?
I would have hoped they said, please stop it. If there are discussions to be had, let's have them privately. Let's look at the case by case, and let's see if there's a proper compromise. But I say again, if he was here on his father's territory, as it were, doing either helping his father, being concerned about his father, and actually carrying out any kind of royal duty, he would get royalty protection. Make no mistake about this. So I say again, this is a storm in a relative teacup, which he is mainly of his making, as far as I'm concerned. And again, he seems capable of taking all manner of people and quarreling with people. And I won't go into what he said in his book. And I've actually read the book. I was actually lecturing on a cruise ship, and I had time on my hands, and I read that book. And again, there's a lot of nonsense there as well, in my opinion.
What do you think the British public make of Prince Harry and his wife Meghan?
Well, if you read certain papers, it's sort of 90% against, who have turned against him. And he was very popular, there's no doubt about it. But his actions, certainly, since he turned against his own family, certainly the British, as far as I'm concerned, don't like that kind of behavior. And so I'm afraid he has to live with the consequence of opening his big mouth verbally and on paper and making false allegations, all kinds of allegations, including racism, which is a palpable nonsense, again, against the royal family. I can't think of a family who are less racist than our current royal family, and certainly the King and his brother. So again, I regard there's heinous allegations as he's made as totally unfounded. And I've been around a long time. So, you know, I've lived with the royals for most of my life, certainly the late Queen, been all my life. So I have a huge regard for them. They're not perfect, but they're certainly not as he describes, as far as I'm aware.
I mean, it sounds like you've formed your opinion, and you've got pretty strong opinions on Prince Harry. I mean, I'm wondering if they built up over a period of time, and perhaps when he was younger, you started to build up a picture of what sort of a person he is. I mean, have you got any anecdotes you can share with us about how he behaved and what sort of signs he showed from an early age of being perhaps a more difficult customer than some of the others?
Well, when I was looking after the royal family in my day, we had, I think, 21, 22, including the late Queen Mother and, of course, Princess Diana, until she herself stopped having royal protection. And again, I thought that was a mistake. But, you know, since I retired, many of the royal family don't have 24/7 protection as they did in my day. And I think, frankly, that's a mistake. If you're going to do it, you've got to do it properly. He was a little boy at a prep school when I was there. I think, see him at his public school in Windsor. But I've formed an opinion based on what I've read, what I've seen, and historical knowledge that I have about the history of royalty family. As I say, I lecture on the whole issue of the British royal family because I find it historically so interesting, from Edward VIII, who abdicated, etc., etc. And history tends to repeat itself. So I try and apply a non-biased opinion on anyone, whoever they are. But his current behavior, and that indeed, I would allege, of his wife, they've added to the disdain that we in Britain have for him. He's gone from a popular, isn't he, bit of a naughty boy, to now intensely disliked, I allege, not by everyone. And I also accept there are those who are his supporters. In fact, I was on a television program yesterday, and the announcer there said she had sympathy with him. Well, I don't have sympathy, because if you want protection, you keep a low profile. You do as you're told by your protection team. And the last thing you do is throw dirt at your family if you don't want this kind of publicity. I mean, whatever school of advice he has been and is getting, clearly they need a sharp reminder of common sense and good manners too.
Okay, if Prince Harry and his wife Meghan watch this channel and you have a message for them, what would it be?
I would say grow up. And if you want protection, go about it in a discreet, sensible, practical way and evidence why you should have it. And then stop behaving like a spoiled kid.
I mean, supposing, something does happen to them, I mean, it's going to put the king in a terribly difficult position, isn't it? If he is perceived as being, having not provided adequate protection to his son. I mean, this whole saga does put perhaps the king in the most difficult position of anyone, doesn't it?
Well, in fairness, he wrongly says if the king wanted it, he could have ordered it to be done. It doesn't work like that, with great respect. They are this group called RAVAC, which are there to provide common sense, to provide intelligence, provide the latest intelligence and the latest threat, and therefore apply it to those perceived to be at threat. So it is outside the king's realms. The king can't order a policeman or woman to do anything in that sense. So he is above it. It is those principles behind him, or those people who are paid to advise on security, and it rests with the Home Secretary ultimately and the Prime Minister. They are the ones who will decree should the evidence, and I keep saying to you, and so please take this on board, he will get and does get protection when he comes to this country. He gets it through his own means, who are professional, they're a professional team, and he gets 24/7 a professional team to support and advise him. It's the big issue is whether they should be armed or not. If he's here on official business, and if he chooses to actually work for his father for once, he would get the appropriate protection. So it's entirely in his hands. He chose to go and live in a far more dangerous place than in England, And there was no evidence that there was physical attacks. Yes, one or two extreme right-wingers have made threats, but they are in prison. It does happen, but it happens to every other royal in one shape or another too. And you apply the kind of common sense that you apply in your day-to-day role, in my role, and in those who have advised me.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Really appreciate it. Davies, former head of UK Royal Protection. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.